Thank you very much, Jeremy. I'd like to thank also Yanis and Jerry for setting up this conference. And here we go. So Rongorongo is on Easter Island, the indigenous script. Easter Island is a volcanic island in the tropical South Pacific, and it's isolated 2,250 kilometers to the nearest human settlement, which is Pitcairn Island. And a bit of history. Polynesians in catamarans sailed across the Pacific as late possibly as 1200 AD after a moistening of the local climate, and were the first settlers there, permanent settlers. They built giant moai statues between the 1200s and the 1600s, and perhaps the depletion of thick timber forests and cordage fiber ended the statue construction period. Europeans, specifically Dutch explorer Roggeveen, arrived at the island on Easter Sunday, 1722. After that, tensions with visiting ships' crews may have led to a shift toward tribal military rule. Internecine wars resulted in all the Moai statues being toppled by the mid-1800s. Blackbirder slave raids after that depopulated the island of 1,500 able males. The males were repatriated, but brought back smallpox with them, and half the island population died in the resulting epidemic. Easter Island since that time has recovered from its apocalyptic past. Its population is now over 5,000 people. It welcomes 70,000 tourists per year as of 2012, and it strives to preserve its language and traditions of its glorious past. KRR Rongorongo likely developed by the 16 to 1700s, the depopulation of the 1860s, and the Latin alphabet competition essentially destroyed their education system, as all the authors and most of the readers had died. Later in 1869, Bishop Yausen was gifted a Rongorongo tablet and undertook decipherment with an informant, Mitoro. Mitoro had received some Rongorongo instruction, and his recollection yielded a less than accurate glyph glossary called Yausen's list, but it wasn't successful in deciphering the script, and the Rongorongo remains undeciphered. The script itself has about 14,000 signs in the remaining corpus. They're found on 25 wooden objects, cataloged by name and alphabet number. Rongorongo has about 300 different glyph forms. The signs may be singles, cursives, or vertically stacked, read bottom up. And Berthin had a cataloging system that he put together in 1958, which is preferred and which is used in this presentation. Also, it has an unusual reading method. It's called inverse boustrophedon, and the diagram at the bottom shows how it works. You read left to right, then make a complete U-turn at the back, double back, but you also flip the board upside down. It's thought that the island rock art was a likely precursor of Rongorongo, and in this diagram I show some rock art images that made it into Rongorongo. In each of the illustration boxes on the right, you have the rock art symbol, and on the left you have the Rongorongo symbol and the board location in which it's found. Possible Rosetta Stone for Rongorongo is on the Mamari tablet, and it's a lunar calendar that's got some interesting features. You have Omotohi, which is the full moon. It's a paradio-like map of lunar seas, and you can see that the full moon is also located right in the middle of the calendar, which is where you'd expect to see a full moon. Some of the moons of the nights of the lunar calendar had special names, and two of them are of interest. One is called the Hua moon, and the other one is called the Tua moon. The Hua moon is, the word Hua can mean testicles, and the image does sort of look a bit like testicles. And the Atua moon, it's sort of a spiny shape, and the word for spine is tua, so you've got that coincidence between Atua and Tua, which again suggests that there's an effort to name the moon according to what was known about the calendar. Also in the calendar, you get predominantly leaping fish in the waxing fortnight, and you get predominantly diving fish in the waning fortnight, suggesting that the leaping means increasing and the diving means decreasing. In total, the C-shaped crescent moons, there's 28 of them, plus a separate glyph for the nearly full moon, and the full moon for a total of 30 glyphs, and the calendar, the actual lunar calendar is 29.5 days, so it's a pretty good approximation. And I might add that before the lunar calendar was noticed on the Mamari tablet, Thompson had thoroughly investigated the calendar with the islanders as early as 1886, so the calendar is well underpinned by known historic tradition. Also, calendar glyphs are logograms. There's no sounding out. They appear to be one word equals one glyph. Another important concept are matrix of analogous island motifs. You've got a few popular island backdrops. You've got the board reading method where you've got the sort of C shapes reading outward and then the inverse C reading back the other way from the end of the tablet. On the center, you've got the canoe-shaped houses, which was the native type of house, and the arc shape would represent a sectional view of the house. And then on the far outside, you've got the lunisolar cycles, and they're the phases of the moon. You've got the C-shaped moons on the waxing side of the full moon, and you've got the backward C's on the waning side. And then you've got the arc to indicate the arc in the sky as either the sun or the moon makes its traverse from one horizon to the next. What we can do, there were a few blanks in the previous table, and so in the red ones, I've filled in those blanks. They're sort of imputed since, for example, houses don't have beginning or ending sides, but they're to be taken metaphorically, possibly. Melka has likened these glyph forms to being brackets, so the beginning side would be the beginning bracket, the ending side would be the ending bracket. And we can therefore say, and we can make a note that these red ones do occur within the Rongorongo corpus. So our model has predictive power in that it foresees stuff that actually does happen, and therefore it's something that bears further investigation. I'm stuck. Okay. Easter Island language exhibits polysemy. That means multiple glyph meanings, and this helps to build vocabulary using rebuses, synecdoches, metonyms, metaphors, idioms. I'll go through a few. Rebuses, where you can have several definitions according to one word, and I give a few examples. Nayu, the palm tree, is easiest. It can represent either a palm tree, or it can also represent vertigo, the same word. Glyph polyvalency, where you get many different meanings coming into one glyph. For example, you have the seated man in the periodic map of the lunar calendar. You have the seated man as a text delimiter, meaning once upon a time for beginning text sections. And you could also have the seated man in a folklore section where there actually is a seated man. So you've got three different forms of seated, or three different definitions for the same seated man. You've got near rebuses. For example, the turtle, Hanu for turtle, Hanui for wealth, Manu for bird, Manoa, Manau for think. And then you've got synecdoches for the female genitalia, where that can refer to perhaps the concept of nubility. Metaphors, where the leaping fish is a metaphor for increase, diving fish a metaphor for decrease. They're also antonyms of each other. And then finally, a metonym, where the sun symbol is a stand-in for the concept of light. We get some of this stuff on our road signs even today. For example, you've got the turtle representing physically a turtle crossing the road. Now here you've got the turtle representing the concept of slowness. It's a metaphor. And then over at the end, you've got you shall not pass. The shell is a near rebus for shell. Okay, and then a few important epigraphic notes. Glyph frequencies suggest that the text is rendered in keyword telegram form with iconic-like and semiotic depictions. Parallel texts, such as the grand tradition, are important for identifying synonyms. That's where you get two texts that are almost the same, but one little difference in glyphs. In this case, the X-shaped bottom glyph seems to be a synonym for perhaps a collapsing stool glyph. Single glyphs can present full words, compound glyphs, or even clauses. And in simplified Rapa Nui grammar, a word, ergo a glyph, can be either a verb, a noun, an adjective, or a participle, so you can get a lot of beauty out of a single glyph, single word. Finally, synonym substitution is absolutely unavoidable. For example, I've given the knife blade glyph there, and it can be either to knife or to divide or to cut. We see the same thing in some of our own icons over here, such as washroom signage. You can call it either women or you can call it ladies. Talk about redundancy. Communication redundancy was pioneered by Claude Shannon, and he studied redundancy to eliminate static from radio transmissions. He also happened to look at writing and noted that it was inherently redundant too. For example, you could eliminate all the vowels from communications, and he found that they were mostly comprehensible even still. And he summarized that writing systems, or he surmised that writing systems ought to be pronounceable on reading, but adding to their redundancy. To which I note that I can join my Filipino friends caroling, and I'm understood while singing from Tagalog sound sheets. I can accurately guess, in other words, sound out every word that I sing. So we can rephrase Shannon. Writing systems are very redundant, in part to enable novices to make educated guesses about words that they don't know. And looking at some of the scripts of antiquity or unknown scripts, we find that they're all redundant. The bottom two, you've got Cretan linear B, and you've got Mayan. They're both syllabaries, so they can be sounded out. Chinese, a lot of the characters are compounds with a Semitic part and a phonetic part. If you know the semantic part, which is the sort of shape of the character looking like a cat in that form, you can guess it. Or if you know the phonetic part, in this case, the symbol for sprout, but pronounced meow, you can guess that as a cat. So you only need to know 1 out of 2 of the compound, and you can still make a good guess at the glyph. Top one is Egyptian hieroglyphics. There you've got what they call consonantal phonograms. The left part is a phonogram with just the consonants, and the extreme right is what a determiner, which sort of gives a hint as to what that cluster of consonants means. For example, if I see a steam gauge and have the consonantal phonogram MTR, then out of the choice of what metro, miter, motor, and meter, I choose meter, obviously, because of the steam gauge. So they all the systems have redundancy. Therefore, hypothesis is that Rongorongo has it too. An example, and it can be done through context. The examples would be the full moon glyph, and the previously discussed Hua and Atua glyphs, where because of where they are, you know about what they're expected to be pronounced. Then there's a Rongo glyph that happens later on. Rongo is a feather stick. It actually should be read as Maro, which is the word for feather stick, but it also means to fathom out. Rongo also means to fathom out. So by virtue of the occurrence in about the place in the calendar where the Rongo moon is supposed to be, and because it's got that feather stick attached, which can be read as fathom out, then you can recognize that that moon would be called the Rongo moon. Then there's the glyph motif itself, and in this case I use the example of the Pacific reef heron. Problems are, there's maybe not a consensus on how to identify the glyph. For example, Yosin defines it as a sleeping bird rather than just a reef heron. And there's also the possibility of a near rebus definition for this. For example, you would have kotuku, which is a fisher bird, or you could have katuku, which means pay attention. Or perhaps it's a metonym. Reef herons are aficionados of wide tidal flats where they can forage. Wide tidal flats happen at various times in the month according to specific super high tides followed by super low tides. And so therefore, the reef heron adjusts its motions according to the lunar month, and so it could be used as a symbol for the lunar month. Finally, you could have mythological type relationship. For example, the moon god Hina once manifested as a duck-like bird, so it could be a mythological connection as well. And Rutledge, an early epigrapher, summarized the dilemma of so many definitions. She said, it's easy to give the term for perchance a knot in a pocket handkerchief, but no one save the owner can say whether he wishes to remember to pay his life insurance or the date of a tea party. But question is, did Rutledge miss something? And I contend that maybe she did. Maybe the Rapa Nui wanted people to correctly guess the common definition of the glyph forms. And this because fully a third of Rongorongo glyphs are hapax forms. They're only occurring one time in the corpus or in one context. And many readers would have struggled to remember all these rare forms, and they would have needed some sort of guidance as they were reading them, encountering them maybe for the first time ever. So one more redundancy strategy becomes necessary for us. And this one involves the concept of base glyphs. Berthin was the first to suggest this. He suggested that there were 120 base building blocks that underpinned all of the known Rongorongo glyphs. Unfortunately, the work was never published. You can think of base glyphs as being analogous to letters in an alphabet, syllables in a syllabary, or if you're a chemistry-inclined person, atoms in chemistry. And analogous to alphabets or syllabaries, the complex glyphs can now be interpreted by the concept-of-it principle, which is my own word, and you don't sound out, instead you concept out the meaning of the final glyph. And I've used the bird glyph, the heron as the example again, and this time I've taken the base glyphs, the calendar form on the top, the moon crescent as the bill, the cover as the back feathers, and then the groundwork as the foot of it. It reads groundwork, cover, calendar, moon. In other words, develop and cover the lunar calendar. So in this case, according to the base glyph analysis, the definition aligns with a metonymic interpretation of the heron motif. And further within the Rongorongo corpus, one finds that there are many different bills for the reef heron. I don't think the Easter Islanders are trying to do Darwin one better in his Origin of Species. I think that these would represent that, or would cause different definitions, basically different words to arise from the final forms of the glyphs that they're modifying. To further clarify definitions, base glyphs can incorporate visual language or word puzzles. For example, the leaping and diving fish, they can be composed of in the case of the leaping fish, which is a better model, you'd have the shelter or the house glyph with the fullness glyph on the top of it. So it's basically a shelter that's full or whatever, which sort of is a good synonym for increasing, which is what we've sort of seen this glyph represents from the lunar calendar. Visual language, not just found in Rongorongo. Egyptian hieroglyphics in Mayan are full of it, and you even see it sometimes for fun in other scripts. For example, the Chinese horse after its horse sign, Arabic cat after the cat writing, and then of course English, somebody's made the word shark into the picture of a shark. Now we'll talk about word puzzles. Sometimes the base glyphs can be an elementary puzzle to help you guess what the glyph is. In this case, they take the canoe glyph, and it's composed of the 3C beginning type glyphs. So it suggests that the canoe is a series of beginnings, which therefore to me implies that it's not really representing a canoe, it's actually representing setting out, like going on a voyage or on a venture. Again, we have these things in other languages as well. We use them as fun puzzles in English, and given 3 puzzles here: travel overseas, stepfather, and potato. Okay, this is a sampling of base glyphs that I've thought up and put together, but I haven't really thought them up. The green ones are all referenceable. It's ideas that people have had as to what the glyphs should be called based on their work and that I've been able to build upon. Of the gray ones, which are my own, there's 3 of them that come from those analogous glyph forms, recalling the Rongorongo board reading, the phases of the moon, and then the canoe house. So for example, this one here would be from that, and then the beginning and end sections would be from the analogous glyph forms, and then also the lunisolar cycle would derive from the analogous glyph forms. So even the ones that I've thought of, they're not just haphazard guesses. There is some motivation to how they're put together. And then finally, the heart of this is a list of references as to where I got the other ones for that did have references behind them. Finally, the heart of the presentation is putting together the base glyphs to make the full glyphs in a number of different examples. The blue matrix would be a definition list, and on the left side you've got the glyphs themselves, and then feeding into it from the green side on the right, you would have the underpinning base glyphs and then the description of how they're put together. Now you can see again that the glyphs would have different definitions depending on the context in which they're found. Good one is a diving fish at the top, where we've seen that it can represent decreasing. Some people have even proposed it to represent war dead, because that's the definition of Ika in the Easter Island Dictionary. And doing it by base glyph analysis, we have fullness plus vulnerability. So again, it harmonizes with the concept of decreasing. And what you'll notice about the base glyphs is that sometimes the only way you can pick off the definition of the glyph, if it doesn't represent one of the red forms, which is a widely recognized appearance, a visual, is by putting together the constituent base glyphs. The base glyphs can be put together in a number of forms. We've got, for example, vertical addition, bottom up on the top. Then we've got horizontal addition, second one. Then we've got complex addition, or a word puzzle for the canoe shape, which we've already looked at. Infixing for this shellfish glyph, and melding together for the basically the capable observer glyph, the little man, I guess, that has the two marrow fathom out attachments to him. And then you can have simple phonetic, but they're extremely rare. This is one case where it seems to work. You've got haka, which is a hare, and then pa'e, which is the elongated oval. And so you'd have haka pa'e for the one of them, and then the other one would be pahaka, which is going the other way. And finally, you can be recursive. In this case, the sun glyph is composed of two that are already compounds. So you can build compounds associated with the, you can have compound glyphs and base glyphs contributing together to make the more complex forms. And here we've got some examples of complex glyph forms that are analyzable using base glyph methods of redundancy. And I'll draw attention to the sun glyph, which was at the bottom of the other page. Now here, the constituent glyphs, the center one with the hole in the middle of the house base, sort of indicates that it's less than certain that you haven't got your full base there. And again, now you've got the overturned house on top of the house, which indicates that the house is sort of vulnerable or shaky or whatever. And why would that be for a glyph that's for illumination of all things? And the answer is that the word for that glyph is ra'ah, but the near homonym is ra, R-A, and that can also mean, is it not true, for example. And so these glyphs that are underpinning the sun that express some form of doubt, I think they're to lead you to confirm that Ra is the proper way of pronouncing that glyph. Other people consider it to be Hetu'u, which means star. So there is some debate about it. The uncertainty forms that underpin it, to me, suggest that it should go the way of the Ra form. Then in the middle, Horley has suggested that these are apexes, which nobody will ever figure out. In actual fact, we know that this base glyph appears to be in the middle, absence of information, and then the hollow belly of this one indicates hunger. So you could be looking at the personification, Mr. Lacking Information hungers. In other words, there's an absence of information there. These ones here, I'm suggesting they might be associated with context, as they occur in a section that I think may relate to a series of folk stories. So they're strange, and you don't ordinarily see them, but because they come in within a known group of folk stories, you can get a pretty good guess as to what they are from that. And finally, the ones on the bottom, well, you can cover them off using the ideas from the base list. For example, this one would be cover off the lunar calendar, cover a time of ensnarlement for the fishhook, cover a time of trouble for the overturned house, cover a time of doldrums, assuming that the barbershop thing represents an uncertain account or something questionable, or covering off time which runs out for the last one, where the 3 lines are indicating something that's dissipating. Conclusions. Rongorongo was discontinued in relative infancy. Its remnants are literary fossil, showing a unique writing system at a very early stage of development. Comprehension-assisted redundancy doesn't just apply to Shannon's orally and directly pronounceable written scripts. Even something more elementary like a keyword rendered Rongorongo seems to have built-in systems to assist readers in understanding glyph meanings. And then decipherment of Rongorongo may be advanced by exploiting its principles of communications redundancy, especially by incorporating base glyph analysis into the process.
Thank you for this exciting journey into a world I knew nothing about.
Okay, hopefully I've enlightened you a bit.
You've enlightened me quite a bit there. Can I get questions from the room? Yes.
Well, maybe I missed something, but why do you claim this writing system is in an early stage of development? Why isn't this completely achieved and effective writing system, and only we are not able to decipher?
I think I'm relying on testimony from some of the early observers as well, which I didn't include here, but there's lots of statements that tell that in board reading competitions or board reading recitals that a lot of the readers were struggling with it as well. And how it's said is that if it was a young man and he was struggling with his reading, they let him continue. If it was an older man, they had some fellow that was, I guess, in cahoots with the judges who would come up and pull him off by the ear. So it wasn't an easy read. Like it wasn't something you could master, I guess, easily, like the English script or one of the syllabary type languages. You had to, I guess, figure out all those word puzzles and visual languages and homonyms, rebuses. And
if there were competitions, then maybe they did it in purpose. They put hurdles into the text to make it more difficult for the competition.
And yes, I guess that's a good answer too. Probably they did do that. So it's a difficult question that you've asked. I guess maybe from our perspective, because it appears to just be given as keywords and requires some built-in interpretation, or at least I'm considering that it's maybe needed development. But you're right, maybe that wasn't considered to be a particular problem by the islanders themselves. So maybe you're right, maybe in some context that it worked very well for them. Certainly, I think it did work well to the point other people hoped that would eventually evolve into, for example, a syllabary. And I'm satisfied that there was really no need for it to go into a syllabary. It seemed to be far enough along that it could hold its own for what it had to do.
Thank you. Yes, please.
When you brought up, especially that example with the sun, I was thinking about Chinese a bit. In Chinese, you have some examples too of things that are identified as multiple components that have some semantic interaction and where you think that you can reconstruct the meaning from the components. And in many cases, that's actually more of a folk etymology, where something that was originally a phonosemantic compound got reanalyzed as a semantic compound. And I was thinking whether that's not the most probable etymology for something like that sun thing too, where originally I think it looks more or less like a sun, and then you have this rebus rebus transfer for unclear it was. And
Yes.
then people thought, oh yeah, that it looks like these two different glyphs combined, which means something like unclear. So do you think that's like a plausible etymology for those glyphs, or do you think that the glyphs came first?
That's a very good question. Those ones, the sun glyph and the elemental components, I would think they would have evolved sort of around the same time because they're all extremely basic and extremely common. They're because they're common, the one with the house on, or the upside down house on top of the house, that also occurs in a parallel text where you have the 3 lines above the house, which again indicates weakness. So you've got a weak house. So that one is sort of firm as it is. Then the context of the other one with the hole in it, there's places where it happens where it does seem to indicate a puzzle or something that's uncertain. So both those 2 underpinning ones are heavily emphasizing the concept of uncertainty. And it seems to be more visual, I think, than phonetic. Generally, the language seems to be more visual than phonetic. I did mention the haka and hakapa. They seem to work, but they're a rarity. They're the exception rather than the rule. It perhaps would have been easier for them if they had emphasized phonetic a little bit more, but they didn't do it.
Thank you, Gordon.